All right, shalom, shalom. I'm gonna get straight into this lesson, but I'm gonna be dealing with this whole lie that the so-called white man created in his different religions, the curse of Ham, that so-called black people. All right, you Israelites, you so-called black people today would be, your skin would be cursed, and it came, the curse came through Ham, which that's nothing but a lie. To push so-called white supremacy. All right, and to confuse our people and have them all bugged out in the mind. So let's get into this lesson. Let me go here. Matter of fact, let me open up with this first scripture. This is the book of Hosea 4 and 6. All right, and that's why these scriptures was written for your understanding. My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. So our people has literally been destroyed. And you go to the word destroyed, it goes into being spiritually and emotionally and physically destroyed, man, for lack of knowledge. Because one might say they're learned in this world, but they've been been given lies. They've been given half truths, skewed information. All right, so you have to have the correct knowledge. You can't just have any knowledge, and they have a lack of the correct knowledge. And primarily, with anything dealing with so-called religion in the Bible has been lied to them, and they don't know it. All right, and they talk out of their ignorance most of the time. So let's get into this whole thing with this lie. All right, and this is Wikipedia, Curse of Ham. All right, it says the curse of Ham is described in the book of Genesis as imposed by the patriarch Noah upon Noah's son Canaan. So Noah didn't put a curse on Ham, he put a curse on Canaan. And I'm going to show you that in the scriptures later in this lesson. And it said it occurs in the context of Noah's drunkenness and is provoked by a shameful act perpetrated by Noah's son Ham, who saw the nakedness of his father. It says the exact nature of Ham's transgression and the reason Noah cursed Canaan. He didn't curse Ham, he cursed Canaan. When Ham had sinned, have been debated for over 2,000 years. It ain't been debated, it's been put out here to cause confusion by the so-called white man, these Jewish people and these so-called white people that's in America. It said the story's original purpose may have been justified, the biblical subjection of the Canaanites to the Israelites, but in later centuries the narrative was interpreted. Check this out, very important. It says, but in the later centuries, the narrative was interpreted by some Christians, you so-called white Christians, Muslims, and so-called Jews, which would be the Jewish people, which are Edomites, as the explanation for black skin. It's heavy. It says, as well as a justification for slavery of so-called black people. That's heavy. You devils. All right, do our people know this? Hell no. They too busy in folly land. It says, similarly, the Latter-day Saint movement used the curse of Ham to prevent ordination of so-called black men in his priesthood. That's heavy. So this was used to push so-called white supremacy, man, throughout the four corners of this earth. And you see, this is many things to get to. Let me say this too as well. Noah and his sons were so-called black men. I'm gonna prove this to you. All right. It says, and this is a whitewash right here. This is what they do. All right. Whitewash. All right. So let's get more into this lesson. So we're gonna pull some up in the Bible, Zondervan Bible Dictionary, and Jewish scholars put this together. All right, so biblical scholars, so-called, put this together. So let's go to this definition. Salakia. 1 second. Okay, check this out. It says Ham, perhaps hot. It said the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. Listen into this. He became the progenitor of the dog races. Read this again. He became the progenitor of the dog races, not the Negroes. So not you so-called black people today, which you descend through the seed of Shem, not Sem, or not Semitic. Shem was one of Noah's sons. All right. But he became the progenitor of the dog races. So that proves that Ham was a so-called black man. So if he was a so-called black man, his father was a so-called black man, and his brothers were so-called black men. But the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. All right, let's go here. We'll go to another reference. This is the website called biblicaltraining.org. It says Ham, the youngest son of Noah, born about 96 years before the flood, and one of 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dog races, not the blacks. So you got to ask yourself this question. What did so-called black people, which would be you Hebrew Israelites, descend from? You came through Shem. Because he had 3 sons. You had to come from somewhere. Let's get more into this. So what's perpetrated to you, and I'm going to get into this information here, is when you think about Noah and his 3 sons, this what comes up visually in our people's mind. This is stored in their imagination. This is a whitewash. And this was pushed and perpetrated in a whole house called a Christian church, which is full of abominations, which pushed these images to our people in Sunday school. All right. And in all these different forms, shapes, and fashions, even with their cartoons, with their movies. Go here. And you see everybody's so-called white in this. But we know Ham was the progenitor of the dog races. So why they got everybody whitewashed? So, if Ham was a so-called black man, his father was a so-called black man, and his brothers. Let's get more into this. Let me get into this information right here. Okay, let's get into it. This is chapter 2. Let me go into this book that I'm pulling this information out of. Of course, they're not going to show it. But the name of this book, is Into Egypt Again with Ships by Alicia J. Israel. That's the name of this book that I'm pulling this from. I tried to put the screenshot on it, but it's not showing for whatever reason. So chapter 2, it said the color of the ancient Israelites. And it's the Messiah description. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, if they burned in a furnace. So if you put something in a furnace and burn it, it's going to turn dark. And his feet, your feet is going to be the same color the rest of your body is, man. Just common sense. So this is the Messiah description as being a so-called black man, because he was a so-called black man. And his voice is the sound of many waters. Revelations 1, chapter 1, 14 and 15. It says, for many years the dominant portrayal of the Israelites has been one of the people who had white skin, so-called white skin. So there's no such thing as so-called white people, like it's no thing as so-called black people. This was a new creation by the so-called white man to cause confusion and to keep you lost and a dominance over you. It says white skin appear to be Caucasian. This is mainly due to the artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, which is a devil, and Michelangelo di Lovasio, whatever, and these other artists, both of whom created some of the world's most recognizable depictions of the Israelites known today. However beautiful these artists' depiction may be, they grossly misinterpret the appearance of the ancient Israelites. The reason for these inaccurate portrayals is quite understandable, since most human beings have a tendency to conceptualize a God that appears as they do. Right. That's why so-called white people push and promote that Jesus name and that image, because it represents them and white supremacy at its finest. A God that has a bodily features such as skin tone, unlike one's own naturally, seems foreign. So artists created, which is something called iconoclasm. Look that word up. When they whitewashed all the patriarchs out of the Bible, the Messiah, the Most High, the angels, and the patriarchs and the prophets. So artists created oftentimes times as commanded by religious leaders, sculptures, and paintings and biblical figures that appear very similar to the people who their artists' works were meant to inspire. So they would copy so-called white people. It says, thus today most individuals are familiar with and continue to accept the notion that so-called Jesus, which his true name is Yahweh, and the Israelites were so-called white. Since the individuals who control the image of God and his people have been so-called European, that's another made-up word, confusion. The images of so-called Jesus, which Yahweh, and the Israelites as so-called Europeans have permitted throughout the entire world. So they just going to brainwash the whole world. It says these inaccurate images have saturated the minds of the masses to such a degree that the true depictions of the Israelites as so-called black people seems to be a mere fabrication. Many people, including a large number of so-called Americans, blacks, so-called, regard the notion of Yahweh and the Israelites as so-called black as nothing more than a feeble attempt to instill pride in the so-called black race. Yeah, they say that too. You devils. However, foreign the ideal of so-called Jesus, Yahweh, as a black man and the Israelites as black, so-called black people may seem this in reality. So let me go here, Salakia. It said, examining the races that Noah's son produced, providing evidence regarding the true appearance of the Israelites. Noah's youngest son, Ham, was the father of the so-called African races, which would be the Hamitic, which include Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and the Canaanites. However, those who eventually became known as Negroes today did not come from Ham. Listen to this, man. Listening is an art. Since Negroes are so-called black for centuries, many have inaccurately assumed that they derive from Ham. This assumption that all so-called black peoples derive from Ham most likely originated from the misinterpretation written in the Babylonian Talmud. That's more madness. All right. The Talmud provides a much distorted explanation of perpetuity curse of Ham, which reads as following. So yeah, they get this from their literature. You know what I'm saying? The Babylonian Talmud, that's what the Jewish people believe in. All right. You can screenshot it and read it for yourself. I'm trying to get through this. It says during the 18th and 19th centuries, in an attempt to convince the slave and his condition was warranted, American slave owners poisoned the minds of their slaves with the Talmud fallacy and these doctrines, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, so on and so forth, the Baptists. Slaves were taught that their bondage and exploitation was a result of, check this out, of Ham being cursed. Therefore, they should not seek happiness in this life, but in the world to come. That's heavy, man. All right. This idea of Ham's curse is flawed by several reasons. First, it was Canaan, not Ham, who was cursed. Second, the curse placed on Canaan concerning servitude had nothing to do with skin color. It is an indisputable fact that the first men on earth were so-called black men. Third, from the Canaan derived the Canaanites and all peoples who came out of their loins. So yeah, I think I'm gonna do a part 2 on this. All right, see you on the next one.